Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest events across Africa. I'm Sudan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you can find exclusive programs such as Behind the Scenes and Mahahi among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sudan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the news. Now let's go straight to Sudan, where the Sudanese coup leader Abdel Fattah Burhan on Wednesday dismissed the last civilian members of his ruling body as part of a power shift to a new transitional government. General Burhan, who grabbed power in a coup last October that drew international condemnation in a surprise move, vowed to make room for civilian groups to form a new transitional government. He also said that the ruling Sovereign Council he chairs would be disbanded, and in an apparent move to carry out the process, issued a decree relieving 5 little-known civilian members of their posts. Several of them told local press that they had received no formal notification and were surprised to discover that their official vehicles had been taken away. The transitional government uprooted by Burhan last year had been painstakingly forged between the military and civilian factions way back in 2019 following mass protests that prompted the army to oust long-term Sudanese dictator Omar al-Bashir. Sudan's main civilian alliance, the Forces for Freedom and Change, or FFC, have labelled General Burhan's last move as a giant ruse and a tactical retreat. They also called for continued public pressure, a call heeded by protesters who manned makeshift street barricades of rocks and tires for 7th straight days. Protesters have demanded a restoration of the transition to civilian rule, despite repeated crackdowns by security forces who have in recent days fired live bullets, launched barrages of tear gas canisters, and deployed water cannons, according to local medics. General Burhan's pledge to step aside for a new civilian government was accompanied by another pledge, the establishment of a new Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. This body would be in charge of defense and security, he explained, feeding into concerns among opponents that it would not be answerable to any government. General Burhan said the new body would combine the regular army and the paramilitary group known as Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, a powerful unit commanded by his deputy, Mohammed Hamdan. Sudan has been rocked by nearly weekly protests since the October coup, with thousands marching in multiple cities. Now, the October protests and coups saw the military of Sudan, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, take control of the government in a military coup. At least 5 senior government figures were initially detained, including the civilian Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, who refused to declare the support that the Sudanese army wanted for the coup, and on October 25th called for popular resistance. Now, he was moved to house arrest the following day, and there were internet outages before, on the same day, the Sovereignty Council would be dissolved, a state of emergency was put in place, and a majority of the Hamdok cabinet and a number of pro-government supporters were arrested and illegally detained. Now, pro-democracy medics said 9 demonstrators lost their lives last week, which was the deadliest violence so far this year, which brought the number of deaths due to the crackdown up to 114 since October of last year. Burhan's announcement has been treated cautiously by international players, with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying he hoped that it would create the opportunity to reach an agreement that ultimately led to a civilian transition to democracy. The United States said it was too early to tell the impact, with the State Department spokesperson Ned Price urging all sides to seek a resolution towards a civilian-led government with free and fair elections. Remaining in North Africa, we move over across the border to Tunisia, where Tunisian President Kais Saied delivered his draft for a new constitution to the public last week Friday after months of political turmoil. A referendum is expected to be held on July 25th to give the Tunisian people a choice, and according to some analysts, the fate of the only democracy to emerge from the Arab Spring uprisings. Tunisia's 2014 constitution established a representative republic based on a parliamentary system, but Saied's draft, if accepted by the voters, would derail it, according to legal experts. Tunisia's political crisis started way back in July 25th, 2021, after rampant protests due to poor coronavirus response, collapsing healthcare, economic decline, high unemployment, and fewer state services. In a response, Said invoked emergency powers under Article 80 of the Tunisian Constitution to remove the Prime Minister and to suspend Parliament for 30 days, parliamentary immunity, and most of the Constitution itself. Said has since tightened his grip on political power. He removed the Minister of Defense, the Acting Minister of Justice, the CEO of Wadaniya, Tunisia's major national television channel, and members of the government, including former Anti-Corruption Commissioner head Chawaki Tabib. The president further eroded Tunisia's political institutions by dismantling the Constitutional Commission, which reviews the constitutionality of laws, and suspending the constitution indefinitely in September of last year. According to legal experts, the draft constitution expands on the powers of the executive and takes away rights from the legislative and the judicial branches of government. The text published on the official government website on Thursday states that Said would continue to rule by decree until a new parliament was elected at the end of this year, and it would also allow him to present draft laws and have sole responsibility for proposing treaties and drafting the state budgets. It would create a new Council of Regions as a second chamber of parliament, and in 2014's constitution, Parliament more directly exercised political power, taking a lead role in appointing the government and approving the legislation. And this seems to shift that away and kind of concentrate power more towards the president. For example, his ability to unilaterally or single-handedly draft an entire country's budget. Now, under the new same text, the government would answer to the president, and through that the parliament, though the parliaments could withdraw confidence from the government with a 2/3 majority. Now, the president can serve 2 5-year terms and would have the right to dissolve parliament as he wishes, and a separate electoral law laying out how voting would work would be published later according to the draft. Now, as the president wrestles for constitutional control over the last year, as we can see, the conflict against his opposition parties continue to grow as a Tunisian judge ordered a freeze on financial assets of the former speaker of the country's dissolved parliament, Rachid Ghannouchi, and former Prime Minister Hamadi Jebali, and several others, an official told Reuters on Tuesday. Now, Mr. Hamadi Jebali's family announced a few weeks ago that he was detained by security forces in Tunisia, and he added that the list of people included Ghannouchi's son, Maoud Ghannouchi, and a son-in-law, Rafiq Abdesalam, who was a former foreign minister. All of these individuals are fierce critics of the current president, especially since he seized executive power last year. Now, going across the border to Morocco, we see African people still continue to mourn and come to terms with the catastrophe that occurred on the border with the Spanish African enclave of Melilla. The European Union Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson, a Spanish interior minister, arrived in Morocco's capital to meet Morocco's interior minister to discuss recent events that occurred on June 24th. Now, the European Commission vowed to step up its work with Morocco to fight people smugglers following the deaths of 23 people at the Moroccan-Spanish border 2 weeks ago. Now, the European Commission has said in response it would enhance police cooperation with Morocco, including joint investigations. Nevertheless, the European Union and Spain praised Morocco for its work, which according to the European Union has prevented 26,000 irregular departures from Africa to the European continent. This is despite the Moroccan Human Rights Association recently showing images of what is estimated to be 12 and 21 graves dug in Sidi Salam Cemetery on the outskirts of Nador, a Moroccan town across the border from the Spanish enclave of Melilla. The first of these posts were posted on June 26th, and similarly the Spanish daily paper known as El Paz obtained photographs of the same grave sites that it published on the same day. Now, the human rights organization Human Rights Watch investigated these images, matching the shape of the perimeter of the cemetery, as well as the buildings, and independently verifying the exact locations of the graves to be the Sidi Salam cemetery. Now, it's been alleged security forces have dug these graves to bury the victims, and this indicates that Moroccan officials are burying these victims without proper investigation, and the European Union seems to blindly support this. And controversially and similarly, the European Union also supports and funds a fragile and very controversial government in Libya. Despite modern slavery, and the government in Libya failed to take any action against this modern slavery that continues to take place against native Africans in Libya, an African country in itself. Now we move further south all the way to the other point of the continent, South Africa, where a mass shooting at a tavern in Johannesburg has killed 14 people and left 3 others in critical condition, according to the police. Police say they're investigating reports that a group of men arrived in a minibus taxi and opened fire on some of the visitors at the bar late Saturday night. Police were on Sunday morning removing bodies of the deceased and investigating what had led to this mass shooting. The 3 critically injured and the 1 person who was wounded have been taken to the nearby Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital. The shooting in the bar comes 2 weeks after 21 teenagers were found dead in a tavern in the city of East London in South Africa. The cause of those deaths has not been yet announced by authorities, but the teens were not shot or crushed in a stampede, according to officials. There has been a steady increase in gun and crime violence in South Africa over the past year, especially against foreign nationals. Now moving to Central Africa, we go to the tension between Congo and Rwanda, where Rwanda and Congo have agreed to a de-escalation process following one-day talks between their presidents mediated by Angola amid rising tensions over activities of M23 rebel group. The Congolese presidency has said the 2 countries will revive a Congo-Rwanda commission which will resume activities on July 12th in 2 days in the Angolan capital, the Congolese presidency said in a statement. Now, Rwanda and the DRC had traded angry statements stemming from allegations that Rwanda backs the M23 rebel group, which is made up of mostly Tutsi fighters from the DRC. Now, the Tutsi ethnic group is also a majority ethnic group in Rwanda, hence the accusations by the DRC. Now, M23 last month seized an important border post in their most sustained offensive since capturing swathes of territory in 2012 and 2013. Rwanda in turn accuses the DRC of supporting a group of rebels with members who allegedly took part in Rwanda's 1994 genocide. Both countries deny both allegations. Now, as I've previously stated here on the African Weekly Progress, the DRC has accepted a proposal for an East African regional force to be deployed in its eastern region to help control the violence, but only if Rwanda does not take part. Now, the Angolan president, João Lourenço, was appointed by the African Union to mediate talks. Now, staying in the Congo, the Islamic State militancy group claimed responsibility for an attack on Thursday that targeted the town of Lumé in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, the group's news agency said in a statement on its Telegram channel on Saturday. On Friday, 2 witnesses said assailants had killed at least a dozen patients at a clinic overnight, blaming the raid on Islamist terrorists allied to the Islamic State. Now, militants attacked a clinic church at around 10 p.m. on Thursday, two witnesses said. Now, the Islamic State terrorist group has slowly shifted its base away from the Levant, Iraq, and Syria, and seems to be shifting heavily and entrenching itself in the African continent, as we've seen an increased presence not just in Western Africa, not just in North Africa with Libya and those countries, not just in East Horn of Africa with Somalia, but also we've seen a spread in Central Africa with the Sahel region, particularly in the Niger, particularly in Burkina Faso. We're seeing more of these terrorist groups propping up and showing allegiance to the Islamic State, and which should be a concern to many security analysts, because what this means is that Islamic State hasn't actually died out. It's just simply shifting its location to Africa. And what these terrorists have realized is that Africa is a continent, riddled with violence and crime. And terrorist groups unfortunately thrive in conflict. They thrive in a lack of government. They thrive in a lack of security forces. And these groups are opportunistic. And these groups are targeting places where there is limited security and increased violence. And this should be worrying many African security experts. And that's all the topics on the program today. Where we find this program very informative. Please tune in next week for another weekly update of events across the African continent.